Hello friends, how are you? My name is Heathen and today I'm going to talk about the concept of Mægen or Megin. And throughout this video I will pronounce Megin because that's how you are going to find that term most often. On the previous video about the parts of the self, the various parts of the existence of a human being that together compose the self, I've finished that video by speaking about the Megin, spiritual essence, power, force. Today I'm going to develop that concept because it's important to understand this spiritual approach so we might better understand what led our ancestors to give gifts to the gods. The act and purpose of giving offerings to both gods and spirits isn't always clear because we are seeking a physical purpose, a reason that fits into the material world, into our reality. But if we take in mind the possibility of a reality parallel to ours, a spiritual reality, that will give us some clues on why our ancestors left offerings to deities and land spirits. Megin is a powerful concept that serves as one of the parts of the self, which explains why we maintain a certain connection with the divine and the spiritual world. Because praying, honoring, worshipping isn't enough. There must be a spiritual link that directly connects us to the divine. So, with no more delay, let's get started. Megin is an important principle of life and the soul in the Nordic spirituality. Mægen or Megin denotes power, magic and magical power. Everything has Megin. Humans have Megin and so do gods, spirits and every natural phenomenon. Everything has essence that empowers every living creature. And this essence can be referred to as magic, in a sense that it's a force that resides in everything and can be used, channeled, to give a purpose to something. The gods have also Megin, divine force, divine power. This concept isn't something new to us. In this modern era, where we try to bring certain spiritual concepts from other cultures into European spiritualities in an attempt to give some spiritual consistency. And sometimes we tend to forget that European spiritualities are as much complex, detailed, and with a lot of coherence as much as the other mainstream spiritualities. Our ancestors already had this concept of spiritual essence, which in the sources often comes described as Mother of Megin, power and strength. This denotes a person who trusts solely in his or her own might and strength, only in himself or herself, and not in the gods and other supernatural powers. This isn't a form of atheism in Old Norse culture. The essence of this concept is to trust in our own might and strength, in our own power to do everything and achieve all our objectives. Trust in our power and our capabilities rather than putting our lives in the hands of the gods or other supernatural powers. This is very much reflected in Norse spirituality. It has always been like that. It's not about praying and waiting for the gods to do things for us. Rather, it's to exchange our essence with the gods and the spirits, and they give their essence back to us. Their power, might, strength, so we can do things for ourselves. In other words, the gods don't do things for you, they do things with you. All it takes is strength, enthusiasm, so we can live our lives in freedom and do everything for ourselves using our own power. Magne or Magni, the son of Thor, personifies this power, the Megin. Magni means mighty, and he is the personification of the power implicit in this concept of spiritual essence. Megin Jord, power belt or belt of strength. It's Thor's belt, the belt Thor uses that gives him strength, and it focuses his gigantic force in one single point. So he can use it, so he can unleash his Megin, his power, might and strength. Which is curious because in many cultures, it's precisely that area of the body where our mighty force resides, in the center of the physical body, slightly below the navel. This can be better understood in Asian spiritualities and martial arts, such as Aikido, for instance. The knot on the belt focuses the attention of the practitioner of that martial art to the center of his body. The Japanese ki or Chinese shi, which is a vital force that forms part of any living entity, material energy, life force. It's a central principle in Japanese and Chinese traditional medicine and martial arts. And Thor's belt is the personification of this energy, this strength and power, a life force he uses in combat. The belt helps Thor to focus on his Megin and use it to empower himself. The Old English sources speak of Megin as some sort of luck, which helps to understand more or less how it works if we already have the concept of emingia, which is luck, and I've spoken about it on the previous video. We know from these sources that every single entity possesses Megin, and it can be transferred from person to person, animal to animal, and from gods to people. Kings lent Megin to their men before going to battle or in a quest that required great strength of spirit. People could also lose Megin for a variety of reasons, almost as if the loss of honor became something physical, or in this case, metaphysical. The Megin, much like the emingia, could be manipulated through various arts such as galdr and seidr, but this translation from Old Norse to Anglo-Saxon reduced the understanding of Megin in its true essence. To better understand the concept of Megin, we must not accept the translations as sources of true knowledge about this concept. Perhaps we should find patterns with other cultures with certain animistic and totemic notions of the spiritual reality. The Northern American natives, we have the concept of orenda, which is spiritual power residing in humans and the environment. It's the force that motivates everything from blessings, miracles, cursing, worshipping, all the way to divination and prophecies. It's something that comes closer to the ancient Greek thumos or thymos, which is the breath and passion, that which motivates and gives the human desire to live or to exist. To the Northern American natives, everything has orenda, everything either animated or inanimate. It's the animistic concept that everything possesses a spirit, and therefore it has power. It has a force that can be used. Shamans have in great abundance this orenda, and it's precisely that great amount of orenda that it is used in every shamanic practice. A fight between one's orenda and others' entities' orenda. The stronger this force is in comparison to other beings, the more chances of success and thriving over others we have. To the Polynesians, the Pacific area including New Zealand and Hawaii, we have the concept of mana. This is the spiritual force that exists in the universe. Much like the orenda, mana is in everything and can be obtained. Certain isles can have a great amount of mana, and it was important to control specific spots in order to obtain this mana, which led to many wars between Polynesian tribes. Mana is the practical force used on everyday affairs, virtually in all activities, especially in ceremonial activities, which have the purpose to maintain and enhance the existing manner of specific places, people, animals, and the environment itself. I've already spoken about certain Asian traditions, such as the traditional Chinese culture, where the key is the active life force or flow of energy that imbues all things and transforms the cosmos into a united and functional mechanism. Through many spiritual practices, including martial arts, a person is able to enlarge the key by projecting it from our own body. This force spreads and influences the surroundings. These are just a few similar concepts that provide a certain understanding of the Megin by comparing it with other spiritual ideas linked to animistic notions of our world and the cosmos. It's just to help you to have certain notions, although these examples I gave you do not fully explain the true essence of Megin. In the Nordic traditions, this metaphysical force manifests itself as a form of might or power, which can be augmented by actions. The Megin can also be increased through the exchange of gifts, through offerings given to sacred powers, and through the association with individuals or groups possessing a great abundance of Megin. As I said before, this force, this power can be passed on to others, but it can also be inherited. And the stronger the Megin in a family is, the stronger it will be in their direct descendants. Many individuals have a great quantity of Megin, and this is why most Nordic pagan celebrations were acts performed by the entire community. It was to gift the divine and the spirits with a great quantity of Megin. The lack of relationship with the divine and the spiritual entities in our environment results in the loss of Megin, which will be reflected on our mental and physical levels, sickness, an unhealthy existence. More or less being in harmony with your surroundings, the environment, in good terms with the spiritual entities residing in your area, including local deities, will give you a great amount of Megin, which will result in enthusiasm, power, strength, might, and you will be able to use this force to live and continue to create, produce, fight your battles, do your daily activities, and so on. A person or a community who is rich in Megin will have success, good fortune, and renown. With that in mind, we can better understand that Megin is the exercising force underlying all actions. In religious terms, offerings are made to the gods return the blessings in the form of Megin, the Megin produces a positive flow of energy, and this entire process is taken once again for new blessings, a cycle of exchanging Megin with the spiritual entities. And this is the exact purpose of giving gifts to the divine. It's not the gift itself, it's what it contains. The animistic notion that objects contain spirit, therefore contain Megin, our essence, our spiritual might, that we have placed on the object so that the gods can have that spiritual essence and give to us in exchange their spiritual essence, their os Megin. Due to the cyclical nature of pagan spirituality, based on the notion that everything is a cycle, certain religious and spiritual actions must be constantly performed to maintain the cycle going. So the exchange of gifts between humans, gods, the spirits, the Vetir, is maintained and becomes a never-ending cycle of interactions between our reality and the spiritual reality. Gifts in the pagan view, especially in European pagan cultures, generally fulfill the role of faith. Instead of praying, Instead of a fervent devotion to the divine to show faith, pagan cultures exchanged gifts to display faith. For instance, an animal was sacrificed and shared with a specific deity. Part of the crop was burned and gifted to another deity. And of course, objects were broken to release the force in them to be given to the entity to whom it was being offered. Through sacrifice, death, burning, breaking, there is the release of Megin, of power and energy residing in things and in ourselves. We give this Megin to spiritual entities and they give their Megin back to us, creating a bond, a circle that strengthens harmony and kinship between the spiritual and the physical. It's a question of maintaining a natural balance through the constant maintenance of traditional acts. This is why in archaeology, when it comes to objects, we find them broken in a ceremonial and religious context. This action was progressively lost, but if we take a close look at the Bronze Age, we find in many cultures swords bent, pottery broken, all sorts of objects broken and offered just like that. The destruction of the objects is to release the Megin, the spiritual essence in everything. This is also why many death rituals consisted in either burning the body or destroying it in another way to release the essence in it. This also happens with animal sacrifices. Only pieces of the animal, only one representative part, most often the heads, because that was the perception where the spiritual essence resided. When you create something, you give part of yourself to the object. You bend your will, you give your time and effort, you put your skill in it and your artistic style. You place in the object emotions. So this is also giving your Megin to the object. By breaking it, you give your essence to the divine and the spirits. In many cultures, the reception of the divine power, the house Megin, is through the hands. This is why in many cultures, even to this day, you can still see people in religious ceremonies extending their arms upward with open hands and palms outward to receive the divine power and to give their own power to the divine, their devotion, their essence. This wasn't different in Scandinavia until very late. Prehistoric and proto-historic depictions of anthropomorphic figures with hands outward, wide open arms, and a great emphasis on the hands. This arcs back to the Paleolithic cave paintings and engravings of hands, communication through the hands. Just take in mind how the first humans started to communicate, just grunts and guttural sounds. Humans from different corners of the world doing different sounds, and their means of understanding one another was through gestures, through the hands. This gained a tremendous spiritual meaning, and we can see that reflected on cave art and hundreds of thousands of hands from different individuals. The hands were their identity, their mark, their way of communication, and what made them unique individuals. The hands started to be used to also communicate with the divine. Why not? If we communicate with one another through our hands, why wouldn't we communicate with the divine the same way? And the exchange of power and spiritual essence was done through the hands. And then, of course, we have depictions of feet in rock art and rock engravings. That's another matter maybe for another video, but it's closely tied to this idea of exchanging power with the divine through the hands. Feet engravings mark the presence of the divine on a specific spot and also the mark of a powerful person who received the essence of the divine through the hands and gave that essence to the very earth by stepping on it, feet planted on the ground to pass on spiritual energy. And the person becomes a vessel of exchanging divine power between spiritual entities of the sky and the spiritual entities of the earth or underworld. Nowadays, most prehistoric engravings of feet were Christianized and became pilgrimage trails because God or a saint went through there and you can see the marks of their feet. But in archaeology, those markings are clearly before the coming of a Middle Eastern divinity, which shows us that that tradition of the presence of the divine was maintained in the area. What's interesting to notice is that most feet engraved on stones are actually women's feet. I have accompanied that study in which a professor of mine conducted that study. Most feet engraved on stones are from women. And nowadays, with the Christianization of those places, the local legends changed and it tells us of either a female saint that passed through there or the Virgin Mary herself. The idea that a female figure passed through there was maintained in the local folklore, even though another religion took hold of the local mentality. So these feet engravings mark the presence of pagan goddesses. Anyway, that might be a subject for another video. Just one other thing before this video comes to an end. As I have said, humans have Megin, gods have Os Megin, and you might find that the ocean has Hos Megin and the earth has Yerda Megin. When we literally translate words into another language, quite often they lose their entire meaning and purpose. And that's exactly what happens here. Megin is strength, force. Os Megin is literally God power. Hos Megin is Old Icelandic for high sea, and Yerda Megin doesn't even have a translation. It's the force and power of the earth, the soil, the elements. This is very much like the German word right here that I won't even try to pronounce because my German is too rusty. But it's the feeling of being alone in the woods. There's no translation for that. Or the Portuguese word fado. Sure, you can translate to fate, but that's not what it actually means. It's the complex combination of powerful emotions that are part of yourself and you can't escape from. The inevitability of being who you are. And you can't possibly translate that into another language because it loses the entire meaning. My point is, certain words can't be translated, otherwise they lose their very essence. Megin is just Megin. Certainly we can translate to strength and power, but it's much more than that, as I have explained previously throughout this entire video. Certain words express the essence of an entire culture. It's our ability to express emotions through our physical body, produce a sound and transform it into a word that it's the very spiritual essence of a culture that shares that spiritual and emotional understanding. So Megin expresses the spiritual essence of the old Nordic culture, and I think that is very beautiful and almost romantic. Alright, my dear friends, I hope you have enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching. See you on the next video and talk with it all.